Finally, it was decided that the UEFA delegate should go and inform the players that a serious incident had taken place. People had been wounded, but should not tell them that people had died, because many players would refuse to play if they knew that. As the French say, it was a case of raison d'etat, reasons of state. The security of the majority took precedence over the personal views of the few.
At 20-10, 2 hours and 10 minutes after the tragedy, the two team captains were asked to talk to the fans, and then the game could go ahead. The speeches didn't make much of an impression. Guido de Winter, the Belgian FA, escorted the Liverpool captain Phil Neal to the tannoy.
I left the dressing room with the Liverpool captain. He didn't know anything, he hadn't seen anything, he'd been shut in all evening. We went outside and he was overwhelmed. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a battlefield. He thought there was a war going on. He was so scared that he asked if he could hold my hand.
It was hoped that watching the final would channel the fans' excess energy, especially that of the Italian hardcore fans, who were still completely out of control. Back in Italy, Mrs. Martelli kept watching television in the hope of recognizing her son somewhere in the crowd. Once it had been decided to play the final, broadcasters had a new dilemma of whether or not to show it. Most did. German television didn't.
Das ZDF hat sich entschieden, dieses Spiel nicht zu übertragen. Ein Spiel, das, so glaube ich, nur noch einen einzigen Zweck hat, nicht mehr einen Europacup auszuspielen, sondern eine neue schlimme Massenhysterie zu verhindern, die Stimmung, so gut es geht, zu beschwichtigen.
At 9:45, 2 hours and 15 minutes after the collapse of the wall, the two teams came back onto the pitch.
I think if you're brought up in the right way and the chief of police says, actually, you have to do this, I think, 99% of the public go, right, we have to do this. I think if we'd been a bit stronger and said, well, actually, no, but if he's saying we've got to play and Juventus are saying they're going to play, then we should play. But I think now you kind of think, well, actually, hold on a minute, that was complete rubbish. We should have just, like, abandoned the game and just gone home.
Yeah, you could have said that. I could have said that I didn't want to play. But then the consequences, what would have happened to me if that had happened? You are owned by them, so therefore, whatever they say, you have to abide by. In today's standards, I could have just said, no, I don't want to play. The youngster who was sitting on the bench at the time, he would have played.
Some of the players didn't want to play, and so Trapattoni and I had to sort of psych them up. We said, look, they're making us play, so we'll play to preserve the honor of the people who have died, to give them a good send-off. They're forcing us to play. We've got to play. Like when there are soldiers in the trenches with bombs falling on them and people being killed, and they have to fight on regardless.
I was very angry, a coiled spring. Ironically, I played the game of my life, maybe because I was so angry and focused. I wanted to prove something to the fans, to win for them. Clearly, if you're going to play, you play to the death, not for the cup itself, but for those fans who died so pointlessly. At least, if they were up in heaven, they would have seen the game.
Alessandro Antonini was waiting for his wife Tiziana to come out of a coma. His best friend didn't know where he was. Fausto assumed Tiziana was seriously injured or dead. He took a cab and went on a desperate search around Brussels, from hospital to hospital.
I was amazed that Franco hadn't called to calm us down. Why was that? Paolo had gone to bed. I went to bed with him to reassure him. But after a while, very quietly, I came back to the phone. The first call, I started by calling his friends at their hotel. I said, please don't leave before you find him, please. They said, Madam, we've already checked all the hospitals. At that point, the stress hit me. I know I passed out. I was aware of them shaking me, and I started to come to. My doctor was there, and our priest, Don Angelo. And then, without any words, no one said a thing. I knew for sure what I had feared from the very start.
Mrs. Martelli's son was probably taken away in one of these ambulances. While the final was being played, the dead were moved from the Red Cross tents just outside the VIP hall to the military hospital. There, 2 cordons of soldiers guarded the dead. The authorities feared that after the game, the news of the deaths would trigger more violence all over the city. Commander Jean-Charles Verlinden was in charge of the morgue.
We thought there was going to be rioting. Tension was running high. We thought people would come to where the dead victims were and might become violent.
Fausto Moschini arrived at the military hospital after he'd tried at least 8 other hospitals. If his friend's wife Tiziana had been brought here, then it was almost certain she was dead.
We had seen people dying in the stadium as a result of violence. We felt that those violent people might come here. Anything was possible. That they would smash down doors, relatives would want to see the dead, that we wouldn't be able to stop them.
I came in down a long corridor and I didn't really know what to expect. They had told me that this was the only place where I might find my friend. There was a gentleman who had brought me down here who had told me, unfortunately we haven't completed the list yet, you'll have to look at them yourself. I assumed there would be 2 or 3 bodies, but when he opened the door, I just saw so many bodies. It was here. I went straight for the smallest body because Tiziana is little. When I got halfway there, I slowed down. I faltered because I was scared. But when I was 2 or 3 meters away, I realized it wasn't Tiziana, but actually a young boy, a 9 or 10-year-old.
In the stadium, the first half ended 0-0. Music was played. 3 hours after the wall in Block Z had collapsed, a list of missing persons was read out over the PA. The head of the stadium workers, Marcel van Biezen, had been helping to compile the list.
I went back to the VIP stand once the game had kicked off, and I ended up next to an Italian supporter who was cheering.
Et il était en train de crier, et puis je l'ai regardé.
I took a closer look at him.
Excusez-moi, mais
Sorry,
prenez pas, parce que
I'm finding all these memories very emotional.
un peu l'émotion. Et je l'ai regardé.
I looked at him and saw that he had no shoes on and was covered in blood, and yet he was cheering on his team.
Et il était en train d'encourager son équipe. Mais j'ai été tout aussi surpris.
But I was equally surprised by my son, who was in the stand facing the VIP stand.
L'actuelle tribune 3. Alors j'ai été le trouver.
I walked over to find him, and everyone there was watching the game enthusiastically, as if it were a completely normal game.
C'était un match tout à fait normal.
I said to him, "Listen, you need to go home," and he said, "No, no, everything is fine.
Tout va bien.
But you know that people have died here."
Il y a eu des morts. Ben oui, oui, il y a un monsieur.
Yeah, there's a guy just there with the radio who's told us what happened. And yet everybody stayed in that stand, utterly unconcerned, watching the match.
Impassible et suivait le match.